Lovely. Well, welcome everybody to Dairy Women Island, Strengthen Your Financial Knowledge. My name's Linnea Ryan. I'm a New Zealander, but part of DWI Steering Committee. And we welcome tonight Mary Kinston, our guest, also our president of DWI. And our host is Deirdre. Our next slide, please, Mary. Thank you. We'll go two down. Thank you, and another one down. So this evening we've got an opportunity to hear from Mary with the key trends in farm finance for 2023. Next slide, please, Mary. And Mary has many years' experience as a farm consultant and facilitating discussion groups across Ireland, and also farming with her husband Kevin down in County Kerry. And Mary spends January analysing the farm financial data. And I just think there's so much information here. And Mary, I'm just going to speak for 3 or 4 minutes on why profit and finances are so important. When we look at this graph of Mary's, we can see here the spread. What it is on the bottom axis is the comparable operating profit per hectare. So Mary's taken financial data and she's now comparing apples with apples. So she's standardized it to allow for whether farms are owner operated, whether they have staff, and she'll take us through the number of things. And when we can see the distribution, what's amazing to me always is we've got, you can see there the average, or where the peak of the graph is there, is about €1,200 per hectare. And Mary will take us through the range across the years. It's been a little of a challenging year, but certainly you'll see the range on average has been below 1,000 up to well above 1,000, and Mary will comment on that. But this range, this spread is what allows the opportunity for each of us on the call to improve our profitability. If we can even move up, say from the average of 1,000 to 1,200, or from 1,400 to 1,600, €200 a hectare, and that would be my challenge to everyone on the call, to walk away from this meeting with enough knowledge. Mary will give us outline of the trends and what to focus on to build our profit. €200 a hectare. See, it's nice. If you've got 40 hectares, that's another 8,000 in your pocket for the year, which is really, really nice. But next slide, please, Mary. Let's just look at the trend over time, which is even more important. So yes, it's really nice to get a one-off on profit, but over time, the impact of those decisions is huge. So if we look at this graph shows a farm, and I've just taken an example farm of 150 cows on 60 hectares. And so it shows the farm starting at a value of €2 million. When we compound that return, so when we look at those profits going out over time, this is where the impact of profitability comes in. So if we look at the average Irish dairy farmer, their 2 million over 30 years will grow a little, but remain reasonably static. When we look at the average course or discussion group attendee, so someone who's already out learning from others, seeking to improve, they will more than double their business size over that time period. And then we look to the top 10%, they'll get astounding returns over time. So the impact of improving profit, nice in the short run, remarkable over the longer term. And for me, if in the farming situation, I would think I wouldn't find myself in that top 10%, but if I could nudge in somewhere on that line between the blue and the red line, between 3 and 6%, growing my returns, so that would give us an operating profit on the top side of the graph. That's what I'd really, really want to be able to do. Next slide, Mary, please. So that the impact of that, when we are on the yellow line, the average situation, minor profitability, we have few choices, less free cash, compared with towards the top end of the graph, more choices, more free cash. It gives us lifestyle choices. We can grow our business, we can provide better educational opportunities for our children, and it gives more succession options. So it opens up opportunities. If I can move to the next slide, please. Can I just ask people that perhaps have background noise to mute? Could they please put them there on this mute? Deirdre, you may be able to mute those people as well, please. So profitable systems are important, and Mary tonight will lead us through what factors we can focus on. So looking at this, an increase in profit matters a lot. It has a useful impact in the short term, compounds into extraordinary impact over the longer term, and provides more choices and opportunities. And what's unique about the dairy industry is we have an attitude of sharing already. And what it says to me, discussion group farmers are prepared to share. And they're already achieving the profits above 2,000. And that's the target level that we wish to be heading. They're already doing that. So we've already got the knowledge, we've already got the science and the farm systems to deliver these profitabilities. The top half of the graph of Mary's are working similar hours, if not even less, to the lower performing. So the challenge is to identify what factors you can implement that already been there. Is it getting out, learning a few things? And what's really interesting, to me, it's up to you. Identify from what Mary will cover tonight and from other areas, from chuggers, from discussion groups, what you can do to improve. And we've all got something to share. So we'll all have our strengths and weaknesses. There'll be some factors that others can learn from you and others that you can learn from the top farmers and then get on and implement it today. So that was just a little look into showing you the range, why we want to sit on the edge of our chairs to mine Mary's data. And Mary, I'll hand to yourself to hear about the trends you've seen and the advice you'd like to give there.
Thank you, Lynette. Okay, ladies, so yeah, it's already been mentioned today, but we are dealing with a reasonably big data set from which I get my conclusions. It's 114 accounts. This I've been doing for actually 17 years, but it's over 14 years, so it's to 25,000 cows. If we look at the scale of what we're working with, I'm covering all ranges really. There's 31% less than 150 cow herd size. 45% of them are between 150 and 300. 17% working in the space of 300 to 450. And 4% are working from 450 upwards. So it shows 511 to 1,023. When we look at the makeup of those herds of what we're looking at, it's 40% Frisian at this stage, 60% crossbred, and I actually have at the moment only one farmer who's actually milking once a day, but he's actually in the top 10%. So, you know, it shows as a system, it certainly can work as well. I suppose just to put this into context, what Shags do is fabulous as well, but the profit monitor, as I'm aware, only 1,500 of those are done. And the thing is about this data set, yes, it's only 114 farms, but they're all corrected and scrutinized by myself. So in terms of its robustness, it's fairly accurate. So the key thing is with financials, though, to start off with, is for people to get an understanding because of what they're actually telling you. Finances and financials tend to be put into the too hard basket because they seem somewhat scary, but actually they're quite easy to understand once you get yourself in the right space. So so first, when we look at financials on a farm situation, on a personal situation, you do actually need to look at the cash side of things. So it's simple: income minus expenses, and that's you basically your cash KPIs. And after that, there's the drawings, there's the tax, there's all the other elements of what we have to pay for. And you can use those to compare within your own business and between years, but you can't actually use those to compare businesses. And so that's where we have to adjust accounts. And even when your accounts go off to the accountant, there is adjustments made, some of them in line with what I do. So when we do that, we've got the cash and the non-cash KPIs, and this is what allows us to compare businesses and systems and stacking rates and what have you to see what is the most profitable, but they're compared analysis. So this is when we've got the cash and the non-cash items together. And feel free, like we'll probably have an opportunity for questions at the end. So I'm just going to try and lead you through this a little bit more. So as you can see on the screen, as I said to you before, in terms of the cash items, very important to get a handle of these, because ultimately this is what affects your bank balance and gives you options or opportunities, or actually puts the financial pressure on. So we've got the farm income, and obviously we're taking off the farm expenses. And from that, we've got a cash operating surplus. But obviously after that, we've got debt servicing to deal with, what investments we make on the farm. So in terms of CapEx, capital expenditure, extraordinary expenses can be like last year, everybody getting exciting and buying the fertilizer forward. So that's what I refer to that, when we buy for the following year, and other things. Personal adjustments, and what we refer to is home use of the car, or ESB. We've got taxation to deal with, obviously, so that's for the year previous. And then we've got our personal drawings. And when I say drawings, it's every element that's subject to the farm business. So we're talking about your health insurance, your life insurance, your pensions, everything. And personally, I actually like to have a handle on what that is. I always get depressed when I realise how much I've actually spent on personal drawings. But yeah, because it's actually quite scary when you add them all up, especially with, you know, savings and what have you. But it's very important to know what they are, because when a farmer says to me, oh, I only need 15,000, I always think he's got a magic wife at home who's got a super paid job. So yeah, it's definitely an important area to know. So that's where we come to other things that can affect the cash as well, is other income. So off farm income from spouses, or even farming from the farming women with their husbands working off farm. And then sometimes funds and capital introduced when we actually go out and seek more borrowing per se, or if you were lucky enough to get a dowry from somewhere. So that creates our cash system. But it's very important on a personal level to know what that is, and to know when it's under pressure. However, when we're looking at accounts to compare, we have to adjust them. Oh, somehow I clicked messages and the next slide. Right, so that's when we bring you on to the non-cash adjustments, and it's sort of getting a handle on what these mean. So from the farming income, what we tend to do is we adjust it for stock. So the first thing is to realise that if you have had 100 cows last year, but this year you've got 120 cows, that you've actually put some of your cash into 4 legs. And if you expand substantially, like a lot of people did over the last 10 years, obviously slowed down now, but that actually ties up cash substantially, and it can hurt in terms of having cash surpluses when you actually do expand quickly. But when you do have extra cows on the farm or extra heifers, we adjust the accounts and give you an income to actually show that they're present on the farm. So that's called a stock adjustment. And it's the same for when you liquidate a herd. If you had 120 cows last year, and because of derogation now you're working with 100, you've sold those stock, and therefore you lost an income from them, essentially, because they're not on farm anymore, and you've actually seen it in stock sales. Another adjustment onto the account is depreciation. I came from a family of metalheads, and we had hardware disease very badly, which meant depreciation is always inflated when you've got a lot of machines around. So it's sometimes determined by system, but it's also determined by how much capital investment you've had to make in, say, slurry storage or housing or what have you. So it's somewhat is related to the system that you're actually employing, but it's also necessary to see the capital in the farm. So that's the depreciation on the account. Then to actually make things more comparable between people, because some people rent whole farms and other people rent sections of farms, we actually give that back, and we don't compare the lease charge. And so someone could seem very, very profitable, and they probably are, but when it gets to the bottom line, they may have to give a significant chunk of that profit back to the landowner. So it's being aware of that on a personal level. We actually adjust the accounts though to pay yourselves. Not probably enough. Yeah, but there's an adjustment there basically for the full-time person for 2,400 hours, which is like 48 hours a week for 48 weeks of the year, which probably none of you are working. But that is there to give some level of money that needs to come out of the farm in terms of drawings and the charge of that labour to the farm. The other thing we don't compare that we take off is it's here as the basic farm payment. I haven't quite got into the habit yet of calling it the BIS and the CRIS, but I will get there. But basically the farming subsidies, we don't compare those, but obviously they are a cash income. So again, it's being aware of that and the cash side of things. So when we've put all those adjustments onto the account, we come to these things that I will refer constantly to gross farm income. So that's basically the cash income plus the stock income. Then we come to farm expenses. So this is a cash expense plus the depreciation. Okay. Then we take off the rent, the lease rent, essentially. We add on the unpaid labour, so that's yourselves, and that then becomes a comparable expense. So comparable expenses, so we can compare between farms. And then the final line is we actually take off the basic farm payment to actually come up with a comparable profit figure. And it's very similar to what Chaggers do as well with their profit monitor too. But it's important that you get a handle on how financials are actually compared and what it's actually telling you, and realizing why you might still be profitable but you're actually short of cash. And again, they're fundamentally two different things. You can easily spend your profit on these below the line items very, very quickly if you choose to service debt too quickly, or you've got 7 sons off to college. So yeah, there's lots of levels there. So yeah, today we're going to focus on the gross farm income, as I said, the farm working expenses, the comparable expenses, and the comparable operating profit. And again, I don't mind clarifying that for anybody. So
Mary,
yeah,
if anyone would like to ask a question now, there will be plenty more time towards the end. But if you want to ask a question, if you look to the bottom of your screen, you'll see a raise hand function. And so people can use the raise hand function too, and we'll notice that coming through. Otherwise, we'll take questions at various points. We'll stop. Thank you, Mary.
No problem. Yeah, so as Linnea alluded to, this is this year's basically trend of the accounts. The median, I tend to focus on the median rather than the average, because obviously abnormal accounts can distort the average, so I just find it more robust. So the median of the data set was 1180 per hectare, which is substantially different from last year. I think it was 2,400, so we're in a very, very different place to this time last year. And I suppose, yeah, my job has always been to try and move lads from the bottom quartile to the top quartile, and it's actually always trying to figure out what the top quartile or the top 10% are actually doing, and use them as a guidance to how we can all get there, essentially. So that is the importance of the comparison. But when it actually comes to financials for me, and I focus a lot on this group, it's the main comparison is yourself. It's very important to know where you were 5 years ago. Sorry, 1 second. Apologies. It's very important to know your progress. So while we do compare, the worst thing that I find you can have is actually competition in this. It's just about improving our knowledge base and making people realize what they can do on their own farms and what their own limitations actually are as well, because all farms are slightly different and have different constraints. So moving on. So this is my slide. So I basically illustrate what's been going on over the last 14 years, 14 years essentially. So just to lead you through the graph, the blue line at the top is the gross farm income, so the income for the top 10%. So the top 10% are today always going to be in this blue color, and then the pink line below that is the income the gross farm income of the median as the average. Okay. Below that, the dash line is profit. So again, the top 10% is above in blue, and the median is the lowest line in pink. So yeah, what a difference a year makes. It's phenomenal to see the crash that we've essentially, well, the lift and the crash that we've had. It shows how nice actually 2001 was as a year as well. But anyhow, so where have we come from? Yeah, so like in terms of income, it's quite like for the top 10%, they managed to actually get it to over €10,000 a hectare, which was phenomenal. Whereas this was in 2022, and now they're back down to €7,000. It's just a phenomenal team to have been through. And even the median last year managed to get to €7,500 per hectare of income, and now we're back down to the normal of just over 5,000. So phenomenally different place. In terms of profit, I've clicked before, I should have. Yeah, so yeah, you can see all the time. Go back, sorry. We won't worry about it. If in terms of profit, you can see that the top 10% are always above the average, as you'd expect, but usually by about a clear 1,000 all the time, all the way through. And obviously that difference was exemplified. But I suppose the key thing here is if you can sort of see it. So what did actually happen between now and this in 2022? So basically the income was the biggest loss across all of us. So we all lost 29%, but actually you can actually really see that spike in the top 10%. They actually lost 40% of their income. So that was phenomenal. And we'll try and explain a little bit why that was, but fundamentally the farms that actually achieved the top 10% in 2022 were very different to the farms that actually generally achieved it in 2023. So yeah, we all suffered the milk price situation. So you can see both the average lost 29% because of the milk price, and the top 10% lost 28%. So there's just a little bit of difference in salaries there, but it was actually the total milk income was when you combine. So the milk income is the combination of price, and it's also the combination of how much milk we supply, so productivity. So the average lost 34% and the top 10% lost 43%. So that's actually showing you that there was actually substantially less milk supplied by the top 10%. And again, just a slightly different type of farmer came into the top 10% this year. So then when we come to profit, when that sort of compounded together, we lost 65% on average for most farmers, which was a colossal loss of profit. So everybody was cushy last year, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you managed to save some of it, and I hope you managed to do something good with it. But the top 10% actually mitigated quite a degree of that. They only lost 54%, and that's where we have to scrutinise how can they do that. And so that brings you then to what we would look at as the farm making expenses. And when you look at the average, they only managed to reduce their cost of production by 1%, whereas the top 10% actually managed to nail it by 28%, which was phenomenal given the circumstances. So again, it's trying to tease into that and figure out how we can all do that. I suppose what I'm putting here is a line, and it's to try and get people into a sense of reality. If you look over the last 14 years for the median farmer, which is all of us, in terms of where that profitability has actually sat, it's generally 1,200 across the board. We've just hit back to normality, and you might be depressed about this year gone by, and that will rally again, but we'll only rally if we make the right decisions. So we're actually in a good space, really, if you consider it to what's gone on between 2010 and 2016. The getting rid of quotas, being able to stock the farms properly, but also the increase in productivity that we've had on a per cow basis. I've seen an extra 100 kilos of milk solids per cow during this time come on. And that was a degree necessary, but now it's all about the chase for milk solids per cow, and there is a balancing to do with that, because that can change farm system and not necessarily more profitable, and often isn't. So again, we'll come to that. So yeah, moving on. So if we sort of tease the data out a little bit, this is 2022 to 2023 for the median on the left, and what percentage changes were going on, and then to the right hand side of this table, is the top 10% between 22 and 23. So fundamentally, for me, in a grass-based scenario and working to our competitive advantage in grazing system, stacking rate and getting it right is crucial. And as you can see, and it might not necessarily have been wrong given how hard the season was, the median cut their stocking rates last year by 3% on the overall, which so all my accounts, just to specify as well, is not enterprise broken down, it's on overall farmer systems over all hectares. It isn't just the dairy hectares. When we look at the cows on the milking platform per hectare, there was also a reduction there of 2%. So obviously nitrates and environmental policies have also had a bearing on those. Obviously it wasn't an easy year as well. So that's generally where the scene of where we're at now is actually where we're reducing cow numbers. And yeah, it wasn't an easy year, so it might have seemed like a blessing in disguise. But if we actually scrutinise the top 10% and where they were last year and where they are now, again, overall, a slight reduction in the overall stacking rate of 2%, very similar to what the median actually did. But when we actually look at the milking platform, it stayed exactly the same. So it was 3.1 stacking rate on the milking platform last year, and it's 3.1, sorry, in 2022, and it's 3.11 in 2023. So no change there. When we actually look at the milk solids supplied per cow, it was a challenging year to get cows to produce. A good February led to a few crappy months after that, and not a great summer. It was either stemmy or soup grass really last year. But anyway, we lost 5% in milk solids per cow last year. It was very hard to get cows to produce. But actually, when we looked at the top 10%, they lost 8%. And this is fundamentally now starting to tell its own story. So yes, it was because of bad weather, but actually because it was a change of farmer. So in 2022, the top 10% were lads who could really pump out the milk solids, whereas the top 10% in 2023 were more the grass-based farmer who was more focused on costs. And I'd just like to refer to that green line that we've just seen on the previous graph about where we've always sat. The last 2 years have been somewhat of a blip, so we just need to keep that in focus. So again, when we're looking at the concentrate usage there, it's been increasing up and up over the last few years, but last year, which actually took a tumble, which is surprising because in terms of weather, it was one of the worst. It wasn't a great year. It was not one, it might stick in a few minds for people, but we actually managed to reduce the concentrate use per cow at 5%, whereas the top 10% actually managed to cut it by 19%. Again, fundamentally slightly different cow, and that is actually derived at the bottom of this chart, and you can see. So we've obviously had quite a lot of industry pressure in terms of welfare and the calf issue. So over the last 4 years, I am seeing a swing from the Jersey Cross now back to the Friesian Holstein. We're now at 40% for the majority of the herds I'm looking at. So over that 114 accounts, so now 40% of them are full Friesian Holstein herds. That's a 6% change from the previous year when it was 37. Whereas actually, when we look at the top 10%, they've gone in reverse. It was 50-50 last year. 50% of the top 10% were Friesian Holstein herds, and 50% of them were Jersey Cross herds. Whereas this year, only 27% of the herds in the top 10% were Friesian Holstein. So it's just being very aware, fundamentally slightly different farmers we're dealing with. There were actually larger herds as well in the top 10% this year. There were generally closer to 250 cows, but there was an awful range. So there were still farmers at lower herd size. And as I said, even one farmer at once a day. So what makes the difference? And this year, this line, this graph sums it up. Comparable expenses. So as I alluded to before, these are adjusted. These have got a wage in for your own unpaid labour that you take as drawings anyway. And we've given the lease charge back. But anyhow, if we look at this graph again, as I alluded to before, the blue line is always the top 10%, and the pink line are the median. So the majority of the farmers I'm dealing with. And as you can see from the comparable expenses, that the one thing that the top 10% always does, and it's retention of profit, they always keep their expenses to just, well, less than, it's just roughly around 62%, but ideally most of the time they're less than 60%. And actually in 2022, when there was so much income coming in, they actually managed to get their expenses to less than 50%, which was phenomenal. But it's not the first time that's happened. That was actually achieved in 2017 after such a rough year in 2016 because of milk price. So that's the key difference. And that's where you all benefited up from last year. You can actually see that in 2022, the majority of farmers had their cost structure at less than 60% of their income. And if you felt that, you know the reality of that difference now. There's so much more free cash around when you can get that in the right zone. Jesus. So that's it. Cost control, 10% all expenses at less than 60% of income. So in 2023, cost control was the most important factor impacting profit. This is a correlation graph. So there are all the data points of all those farmers I dealt with. And it shows, obviously, that as you increase your expenses, your profit goes down substantially. The R squared, which is down here, is 0.81. So that basically explains that expenses explained 81% of the profit that everybody achieved. That is a seriously strong correlation. And I suppose the key interest to me, being the nerd and always doing the analysis afterwards, is that's not always the case. So just to allude to where we are now compared to where we've just been. In 2023, so as I said, that ratio was 82%. And we came up with a profit of 1180. Whereas in 2022, if we look at this number here, last year, this relationship was only 66%. The profit was massive. It was 3,337 again. And I don't think we'll ever have such an impact. And actually what's had more influence on profit was actually how much income we were receiving. So if I did the same line for gross farm income, milk income, sorry, that was having a 74% correlation with profit. It was huge. So if you were income focused and you drove productivity, you actually could make a better profit. And that's the key thing about being a farmer in Ireland, is the ability to realize when you should do what you should do. And actually that's one of the hardest things to do. So we often rely on systems that are very repetitive, repeatable, and yeah, there is in lies the challenge. So that was the same circumstance we actually saw in 2021. Again, it's a fabulous year. An average profit of nearly 2,000 per hectare for all the lads I was working with. So a great place to be. But again, milk income is really driving profit now, and expenses wasn't as important. So what I did was actually look back to a year when we achieved a similar profit to what we did in 2023, and that was 2018. I think most of you will remember what that year was like, a little bit challenged by a drought. And that's the same circumstance. When profitability is squeezed, expenses become especially important. So you can see that in that circumstance that this ratio of expenses to income again became significantly more important at 77. And again, the importance of milk income started to disappear. So yeah, we're a fundamentally different space. So look, just to try and explain that graphically, this is basically what's happened between the 2 years for the median farmer. So this is 2022 versus 2023. So in 2022, we had an income of 7,000 per hectare, which took a mighty wallop of 29% and dropped to 5,000 per hectare in 2023 for the majority of us in simple figures. Then when we put expenses onto it, if we consider if we could get that ratio to 50% of cash expenses onto the account, so that's an expense class, we then apply the labour adjustment to the farm. That means we end up with a profit in 2022 of 40%. However, when we come along to 2023, given the same ratio of expenses to income of 50%, that means we only spend 2,500 per hectare. Apply the same labour adjustment of €700 per hectare, and you can see the profit squeeze. It's lost €1,000 per hectare. It's gone from 40% to 36%. So in this scenario, in 2022, we've got comparable expenses at 60%. Whereas in 2023, in this scenario, because of that labour adjustment, we've got comparable expenses at 64%. So actually, we're in a great space with this because they've managed to actually reduce their expenses by €1,000 per hectare. On the majority of farms, that did not happen. That's what needed to happen. And you still ended up losing €1,000 per hectare, but that did not happen. Mm-hmm. So this is what happened. So again, this is 2022. Unfortunately, the costs didn't change enough. So in this example, I've got the cost at 3,250. So actually 250 less than the previous year. Again, applying the same labour adjustment, you can see that the profit is absolutely decimated to 1,050. So 21% of the income. So again, in 22, we had the comparable expenses at 60% of the income, whereas in 2023, they were now 79%. And this was in a situation where we'd actually reduced the cost of production by 7%. So they'd actually tried to be more aware of the cost control. And that was the reality. In this scenario, it's very crude, but it shows that the profit increased 3%. Sorry, there's just a bit of background noise there. So, and that's what the majority of people experienced, and it was a colossal impact on the account. So, you know, graphically, I hope you've just got a little bit more handle on why it feels so much more like a bad year, and actually, realistically, we've achieved a very average profit to what we've done. The key thing is, sorry, I've just got an intrusion by a little lady. The key thing is about this slide, and it's just to realise, is that the top 10% repeatedly make this profit of over €2,000 per hectare, annoyingly. And in 2022, they actually managed to squeeze it up to 5,400 per hectare. So there's huge opportunity to grab thousands if we can just get ourselves into the right system. So there's the big questions, I suppose. So in 2022, 2023, did we roll over to regulation and absorb costs because we believe we could afford them, is one of my questions. Some of the costs were coming at us whichever way we looked at it, but some of them we've absorbed. So what am I on about? I suppose the key thing is here, one of the first things that's starting to become noticeable is reduced stocking rate. And I'm not against it. I realise, you know, we've got restrictions and we have to move, but just be careful how much we move away from a system that's repeatedly gives profit. So nitrates has had an impact. A lot of people have either had to reduce their cows or lease more land, and the land rents have been getting excessively have been increasing substantially. And the challenges with having the right ratio of land is that, you know, how many more acres do you actually need? People are very fearful about what is to come, but it's just trying to manage where we are right now. And it is a challenge, but like, if you have too much land, it comes at cost all the time. So we've just got to try and keep that in balance. So yeah, there is some farms now that have got a disproportionate amount of land relative to the milking platform. So we need to keep that in ratio as well. So it's about the supply of feed. So we have to get it right. We've had quite a lot of breeding changes, and I'm not averse to these, but sometimes it may seem I'm negative, but it's just because they're coming with we're absorbing the cost of them. Again, it's about getting the balance right. It's about making the right calculations. So sex semen's come into the picture, not against it, but it's pushing nearly €50 a straw versus, you know, 15 to 17 of a conventional straw. So it's just about getting the right balance. We've then utilized fixed time AI. So often there's been a huge amount of people that have taken their maiden heifers, they've used fixed time AI on them with sex semen, which is more variable in terms of results, and spending near on plus €70 per serve. It's a colossal cost because you can't guarantee your result. And also, did you need all the heifers you're going to generate from it? And that is a key thing as well, is that the decisions we make there, we get them in balance. Again, we've got to change of breed because of the calf issues that, you know, are constantly getting rammed down our neck. But again, are they going to drive profitable systems? So there is more Frisian Holstein replacements on board, and I understand that. But again, for some people who went down the Jersey Cross line, we did it for a reason, and it's trying to hold on to those traits that have served us very well. Obviously, there's more beef calves coming into the system. They're adding on basically time to calving interval in some instances, so it's trying to manage that as well, but also having to feed calves for longer too, because nobody wants a 5-day-old beef calf. Not that we've sold them 5 days, sorry, but even a 2-week-old beef calf, they don't want that. They often want to see them at 6 weeks plus. So there is challenges ahead of us, and it's trying to manage the cost of those challenges too. So essentially where we're at the moment, we're getting eroded by having to change our systems, and also the complexity of our systems that have been put onto us. Last year as well, so again, nitrates, we've had lower fertilizer use, so that in 2022 and a degree in 23 because of forward purchase, it was a high cost per tonne. So we started the year with very expensive fertilizer, and some had already forward purchased it at high cost because there was a lot of hype about supply that actually didn't materialize. We've obviously been reducing our use as well of nitrogen for environmental reasons. I understand that too. And we did need to get more efficiency in nitrogen efficiency again, but again, it's about balance. We're obviously embracing clover, so that's almost like going cold turkey, it feels at times, trying to get the clover to establish. And again, we're foregoing the grass growth at times, and it's just about trying to get that balance. A lot of people now, with all the change in regulation, actually do not know the limit that they're allowed to apply of nitrogen, and so they've moved substantially away from that limit because of the not knowing if they're close or not. And there has been sort of impact of reducing pasture grown, and we have to remember that pasture is our main competitive advantage because we're actually very high cost structure compared to the rest of Europe, except for the fact that our feed is very cheap to produce. We are the Emerald Isle for a reason, and we need to realize that. The other thing that's happened as well, we are accepting the inflation in input prices, and that's what can you do except accept them? Yes, I get that, but there is a way to reduce the acceptance, and that is unfortunately the hard decisions of reduce your use. Now, obviously, things like ESB have come into play there, but actually that in terms of a percentage, it's not massive on the account relative to income. So yeah, there is lots of items in this, so I'll go through that. So I'm going to list that. So look, I suppose the key thing I want to point out here is that for yourself, for your own personal self, economic policy still matters. Yet it seems that welfare and environmental policy has taken over all decision making on farm, and that is actually what worries me. I suppose, given my English background, I come from having watched my family go through the deregulation of the milk board, and in 05 and 06 selling milk for 10 pence a litre, and the financial pressures that puts on a family. And we got through it, but it's not nice on the choices of whether you've got the money to send your kids to university or not, or whatever. And that's the importance of this, is about giving your circumstance choice and holding on to the importance of a profitable system. I always admired Ireland for its ability to hang on to the family farm. Yet again, it seems to be substantially eroded. So, you know, we do actually need to shout the importance of economic policy. So look, just to try and address some of those issues, what am I going on about? So in this circumstance, we've got the medium farmer, and we're looking at the opportunity to rent acres, to hold on to the cows that we've got or whatever, or to even have that potential to expand if we've got the capital in the yard to utilise. So in this scenario, if you're earning a profit of 1180, which was the average for 2023, which is comparable to 478 euro an acre. If I aim to retain 50% of it, the most I could afford to pay is 240 euro an acre. That's not including the subsidies, mind. But again, we all know land rents have got substantially more than that. If you look at the top 10%, however, given that they can achieve a profit of 2,484, which equates to 1,005 per acre, if they retain 50% of that, they can actually afford to pay 503 euro an acre. They certainly have a competitive advantage. You can see that variance now in the market, depending on how financially savvy you actually are in this circumstance. And that's the question. If you are in the latter half, if you're paying more than 240 an acre and you are not achieving the profit of a median farmer in my data set, and you're just working for the landlord's living rather than your own. And these are the hard questions that we now have to ask ourselves about the space that we're in right now. So, look, the first thing I would point to, and especially alluded to on the first slide when we looked between the years and between the top 10% and the median farmer, is your stocking rate. So if we look on the milking platform this time, so, you know, this is often what the limiter is on farm anyway. It's important to stock our farms appropriately. So this graph essentially is the tons of grass grown looked at in terms of what's available per cow. So I take everybody's pasture grown and then I divide it by their stocking rate on the milking platform and what they're actually allocating. You can see the spread of data. It's actually quite a strong correlation here. But ideally, given a grass-based cow, and I've given it here for an example, at 550 kilos of live weight, producing 450 kilos of milk solids, they need to eat about 6 tonne. In the grazing scenario, obviously, then we want to be offering them between at least 4 and 5, because we're going to give them probably 500 plus kg of dry matter of concentrate, and we're also going to give them between a tonne and a tonne and a half silage over the winter to balance us up to that basically 6 tonne essentially. And you can see here that to do that the ideal sort of stocking rates on farm sit between 2.6 and 3.1 in that range, and it's all relative to what's the potential of that farm to grow. So that's the sort of key point here. To the right of the graph, towards where the R squared is, you could almost say it's a little bit wasteful given the stocking rates there in terms of what grass is on farm and it's not being utilised. And to the left, this is a circumstance where they've actually pushed the stocking rate on the milking platform quite high, and it's starting to compromise cows. And in some degree, that is a change in farm system. And there has to be questions around that if you have the right ratio of land. And that's the trouble. So if you've got a huge amount of support ground, some farmers will make the decision to actually stock their milking platform up quite high to try and earn income that would be spread over all the acres, because there is no other enterprise to compare to dairy in many ways in terms of its ability to generate income. But again, it takes a slightly different skill set to actually feed that cow, because you can see the pinch on it. So anyone with a stocking rate of over 3.5 starts to reduce the grass availability to that cow quite substantially. And again, this is relative to last year. It wasn't a great grass growing year, but also people's perspective has changed substantially. If you used to look on Twitter 3 years ago, huge amount to talk about. I'm growing 16 tonne of grass, dry matter per year. Now nobody mentions it, and 12 is very much common. So yeah, our focus has changed. So it's just about realizing what, stocking rate's very important. We've got to get appropriate on farm. If you're chasing down the clover and the low nitrogen and it's having a substantial compromise on your grass growing, then you have to compromise your stocking rate on the platform. Again, is that reducing your profitability or making you better? And therein lies the quandary. We just got to balance it out. So again, referring to that data set that we were looking at before, this time I've swapped out the stocking rate and the milking platform for nitrogen application per hectare. Again, so what I was trying to allude to here is that some of the changes that we're giving away because of lower stocking rates or what have you is not making us more profitable. It's sending us in the reverse. And I'm just making you very aware that you need to retain your profitability. So and look at the nitrogen use here for the top 10%. They have reduced. Last year, they applied 215 kilos of nitrogen per hectare. They took an 8% reduction to 197, but they didn't reduce the same amount as the average farmer, who's gone from 190 kilos of nitrogen per hectare down to 163. And as I understand, that's way below the limit of 220. So yeah, we have to move, and we're moving down, but why we're moving down so quickly when we haven't got clover so established on farm or other options or our stocking rate quite right? So yeah, some big questions to be asked. So then when we're looking at land utilization, sorry, I clicked a bit too quick there, but basically this is the ratio of the milking platform to all of the hectares we've got available to us. Ideally, in a dairy farm where you're rearing your own replacement, so you've got your young stock on, the ideal sort of place to be is actually around 65%. You can push it just about to 70, but to have enough winter feed on hand and enough grazing, 65% seems to be a nice sweet spot. As you can see from around 2016, we've actually had a little bit more land in the system, and we've actually tried to improve our profitability by actually stocking the farm by having more milking platform and less support ground, essentially. Okay, and then in terms of the livestock units, obviously we need the right ratio of cows on the farm as well. And historically, we've always ran quite a lot of replacements, and maybe too many. So the cows in 2015 were only making up 74% of the total livestock units. So there was an extra weaning and heifer on board for 6% than necessary. We've obviously reduced that now, and we've got more into the ideal zone of having between 18 to 20% replacement. So yeah, but you can actually start to see now in those two figures, as we've moved into from 2021 to 23, we're actually starting to reduce that number of cows on board. When we look at the stocking rates, what have been happening over time as well. So obviously in 2013, we had a huge amount of potential to increase our stocking rate overall and on the milking platform. And we did just that. That was how we improved our profitability. It's how we moved into this era. Yeah, so they've been increasing up until the last 2 years. We can see they're starting to reduce because of the nitrates pressures. And they were what we were utilizing to stay profitable in an inflating environment of costs. And now they've been eroded. So just rules of thumbs, I suppose, for you to remember. If you are rearing your young stock, the ideal is to see if your milking platform's around 65% of the total land base that you've got, and that your livestock units are, in terms of cows, are 78 to 80. For those that are utilizing contract rearing, if you your milking platform was 65% and you are using contract rearing, it's not appropriate. Essentially, you would want your milking platform to actually be substantially greater than this, but you can actually run at about 85% because you still need feed in the forms of silage, so you can still have 15% support ground even if you've got your young stock off. So it's about getting the right system in the right circumstance. So there's nothing worse than seeing somebody contract rearing but they've got actually far too much support ground. So that's not right either. So we've got to get it in balance. The other side of the coin is if your milking platform is less than 65%, this is when you would consider either the higher stocking rate on the milking platform, which you can see puts slight compromise on cows, but you just have to be able to manage that, or you have to consider other enterprises like, say, beef or what have you, and you know the reality of that. But it's just to realize that you have to make those other acres pay, especially if they're rented. So it's about getting the balance right, and that's probably as nitrates kicks in and they keep fast, and especially as the 170, if they really go for that, and I hope they don't, but that will see farmers diversify into other options because we will be financially squeezed then. I suppose another issue is a change of breed, and I understand why it's happening, and there's a huge amount to talk about it all the time. And this is a large data set, I know, and I apologise for that, but it's just realising where things are at. So just to point out here, so we've got the percentage of, so we've got the top 10% on the far left and the far right, for the Friesians on the far left and the crossbreds on the far right. And these are the profits that are actually being achieved for those. The medians are in the middle, okay? So if you can just try and navigate yourself around this slide. And I suppose when it looks at profitability, it looks like the Friesians are just slightly better there at times. But again, it's probably not statistically very significant, especially because you've got more farmers in the crossbred situation. But anyway, Friesians are as profitable. I have no doubt about that at times, but they do come with a degree of compromise that needs to be obviously realised. So obviously, in terms of butterfat, yeah, no surprise, they're on the lower side. In terms of protein, no surprise, they're on the lower side as well. So that's going to have an impact on prices, just as long as people are very aware of that. In terms of the milk solids per cow, again, the top 10% generally producing more. So there is always in financials an efficiency necessary to productivity. So that's certainly an avenue they do exploit. Again, actually in this scenario, you can see that the crossbreds are actually on the upward side of that. Then we look at the genomic potential. Now, that's probably a new term to some of you, but when you've got an EBI, if you look on that EBI, they actually indicate what your kilos of milk is and what your potential is for butterfat and protein. And I look at those to actually see how much of that genomic potential we're actually achieving. And what you can see here is that generally the Jersey crossbreds are actually achieving more of that genetic potential actually than the Friesians in this scenario. When we look at the live weighted animals, so I'm actually starting to see quite a substantial increase in the live weight of hers now as we switch more to the Friesian, but the Jersey cross is still achieving more of their live weight, the Jersey cross herds per kg of live weight. Again, the lactation numbers are very, very similar. We're being promoted to increase these. There is, it's reasonable at 3.5, and in my experience, I don't like herds. This is for the whole herd going too much above 4 because they just get hard to manage. The calving interval here, you can see the variance in that, and this is quite important to me, calving interval, and the 6-week calving rate. We're trying to get days in milk. Days in milk very much impacts productivity. Again, you can see it's slightly better for the Jersey cross. Again, the same as 6 weeks. And lads, I'm not trying to upset anybody here. I'm just giving you the data of how this works out. So one point I didn't allude to, again, you can see it from the average data. So of my farmers, 40% were Friesian Holstein on average, and 60% were crossbred. But of the top 10%, only 27% were Friesian Holstein, whereas 73% were crossbred. And it's just the reality that you can see on the breeding statistics that actually that's still a little bit of a substantial compromise on the herds, essentially in terms of that breed difference. And then when it comes to grazing days, what was it making up? You can see those crossbred herds are still getting 10 more days essentially at grass. So realizing that difference. And then the meal per cow. And that is one of the biggest trends I would see with the Frisian-based herds. A heck of a lot more meal going into the system. They're very much more minded that way. And it's being able to make those right decisions about when that should go in and when it shouldn't. And last year you could have piked in the meal all day long and you would have made a profit, would have been no bother. But you can just see this is the response, done very crudely, but it's always worth looking at. Kgs of milk solids per kg of concentrate dry matter going in. And again, you see like the top 10% are doing a reasonably good job. They're getting 0.6 of a kilo of milk solids per kg of concentrate going in. I find that if anybody's doing 0.6, that they're doing a reasonably good job, but you can see that's more likely to happen for the crossbred scenario, and actually the top 10% are actually doing even better. So that's the challenge here. So as an industry, we're moving back. The farmers I know and work with, and even myself, I used just Frisian straws last year. We're moving back to Frisian because of the calf issue. But as far as I can see at the moment, they're not given the same equal traits to what the Jersey cross was. And again, we need to be careful of what we're giving away. So, just realize that movement. In 2020, the fellas we're working with that were predominantly Frisian Holstein were 27%. In 21, it's 34. 22, it's 37. In 2023, it's 40. We're all moving, but just be very aware of what you're giving away and do not let it go. So you're going to have to put a lot more attention into your fertility statistics, and you're really going to have to put some attention into selectivity of your PTAs for butter, fat and protein. And you're going to have to work hard at grazing days, and you're going to have to think about seriously when that concentrate goes into the system. So look, when we look at costs and looking through those, so this is how things have changed since 2010 to 2023 for what I refer to cow costs. So stock haulage, dead stock and tags and levies, your breeding costs, your animal health in terms of the vet and med. I actually split this out and do health and disease preventions. I do vaccines separately because obviously they've become a greater reality for a lot of people. Milk recordings in there and parlour costs. So parlour costs are at the top in this quite a luminous green. Stock haulage is at the bottom in a very sort of mild green. The animal health in terms of the vet is in that bright pink. The vaccines in the purple. Breeding is in sort of the green, and milk recordings in the turquoise. You can see quite substantially over the last 4 years that they are inflating substantially on per hectare basis. So in 2010, this is what we were dealing with. And this is what we're dealing with in 2023. So I could go through them individually, but I think this one helps everybody. So yeah, stock haulage, dead stock and tags and levies has increased 250%. A real big rise item, but it's a small item, so we actually haven't taken any notice of that too much. However, the vet costs have been increasing substantially. I think during the last 2 years, there was 2 rises of 8% on most vaccines and most tubes. It's very noticeable on farm, but it actually hasn't been ridiculous. It's 150 for the vet, but vaccines have gone up nearly 200%. So to be aware of that. Breeding costs are up 161. Again, we've had those changes in breeding choices. So the average now is at 85. But there's plenty of farmers out there spending 120 or 160 euro per hectare. So yeah, quite a bit of inflation done by choice. So just when you're making your breeding choices, be very aware of the cost and get your biggest bang for your buck for what you actually need. And that's actually doing the maths to figure out actually how many heifer replacements do you need to breed for. The milk recordings up 181% and the parlour cost up 261%, which is a massive rise. And actually no one took much notice of these, but that's more than doubled. And again, we've had to move away from chlorine-free detergents, but also there's been predominantly a heck of a lot more auto washers gone in farm, which are great for labour saving, but in many ways it takes away the control. And again, it's about where can you exert your control. At least with, you know, a manual washer, you can determine what detergent. So you're allowed to use powder detergents, and you can choose when they go in. You can even reuse wash water for the night milking. So there is lots to play with here, and it's looking at those choices. Then we look to this one is changes in feed costs per hectare. So again, just to look through that, the purchase concentrate is in the nice soft pink. We've got after grass, we've got minerals, we've got other feed related costs, which is milk replacer and plastics, to be honest. Then we've got the silage contractor, that's in that sort of light green, so look at that. And then machinery, fuel, R&M. These trends have been very much bouncing around. For some, they're probably just inflating. So you can see if we look at the last 2 years on the machinery, fuel, R&M, that there's significant inflation in that cost per se. And there's been quite a little bit, I'd say bitching, but moaning about the contract costs. And yeah, the charges per acre have been going up. I think many quote now about €160 per acre, and when I started it was 100, so yeah, that's up 160%. But you can see with the concentrates bouncing around all over the place. Obviously a spike in 2018 after quite a hard drought, a spike in 2013 because it was not a nice year, cold start to the spring, and then just a tough year after a bad 12 with not having enough silage supply. But you can see in 2022 and 2023, it's quite raised, in that increasing trend from 2019 to 2020 to 2021. We're getting very used to putting in feed into the system after the blip we had in 2018. So just to exemplify that in terms of kgs of dry matter going in per cow, if we roll it back to 2012, we were putting in 612. We had a blip in 17, but we had some very tight years because of quota, less than 500 kilos of dry matter per cow. We were very much in control in 17, and then we hit 18. And then we realized we could feed cows, but we also realized we could get milk out of cows too. So it's slightly shifted mindset. Anyway, we readjusted, got a little bit back to where we were with 600s and 700s going into 2019, 20 and 21. And yes, people have been hitting, you know, there's farms that's still been hitting dry conditions at times. I realise that. But like, actually, the wetter years, especially we're down here, and it's harder to, as you've all realised, it's harder to get cows to produce in the wet as it is the dry. So it's making me wonder why we've had such a shift. But obviously here we're in 2022, quite a lot of feeding. And I think that's the key thing. When there is money in the account, people are quite happy to spend money on feed. Now, yes, it inflated in cost quite substantially, but even though it inflated in cost, it was still fed in quite colossal amounts. We've managed to curtail that a little bit in terms of the amount going in, and it's been surprising given that it's been a tougher year. You've all suffered the wet a bit, and cows just especially given up in the back end, but we're only down at 808. So there's a bit of work to be done there, and sometimes I question in this last 3 or 4 years have we fundamentally changed system a little bit. We've got very used to putting in more feed, and are we losing our competitive advantage on grass grown a little bit? But yeah, that's it. That's where things sit in a nutshell at the moment. And then we look at fertilizer. So this is expensive. Fertilizer was expensive in 2022 and 23. So we've got fertilizers in big green band. Sorry, the one there's others. There's forage crops and seeds and sprays, which are the little lines at the top, but the other big one there is other contracting. So you can see in that light blue at the bottom that we have had quite a substantial inflation in other contracting. So obviously the charge to get slurry out has become substantial on farm. Yeah, it could be reseeding, but there's not that much more reseeding done. So it's generally slurry, but also probably there's more of it going out as well. But then you can see the impact that fertilizer is having here. So again, if we look at it like the feed, how much nitrogen did we actually spread? We actually peaked out in 2017 at 246 kilos of nitrogen per hectare, and 18 we kept chucking it on even though the grass wasn't growing, even though we were buying feed like nobody's business, but it was cheap. Then we were starting to get cop onto ourselves a little bit and realize we weren't quite getting a bang for a buck. And then last year hit, and obviously the price of fertilizer was through the roof, but we still applied 190 kilos of nitrogen per hectare. So now I'm questioning, even though it's got somewhat cheaper, why are we down at 163? And again, it's everybody's got a circumstance of knowing, can I grow grass this week, and are the conditions ideal? And maybe it wasn't as ideal, but we have retracted a huge amount. And yeah, I get it. It's part of the cost structure as well. We're spending quite a lot on fertilizer, but it's getting much more into line. So, it's just about getting a handle on that. If it's compromising grass growth, we need to keep it in balance. So look, I suppose just given the inflation in costs, and I just wanted to outline what were the trends in milk price, because obviously now cost control is your priority for 2024, because as you'll always realize, there's very much little control on the price that we actually get paid. And the reason I've got these bars in different colors is because when you slap this little bar down, you can actually see that we've only ever been paid more than €5 per kilo in 4 years. 2023, 2020, 2014, 2022, and 2023. So in some ways, you could argue that we actually haven't been paid that badly in 2023, even though it seemed like a poor year. So you can now sort of start to feel that the costs really have got somewhat out of line relative to what the income is coming in, and that we need to get a handle, because you can see for the majority of those years, for the majority of the years that I've been looking at, we have not been paid more than €5 per kilo. And that's what worries me presently, is that what is the crystal ball for milk price? And it is optimistic at the minute, but I don't think it's the €7.50 per kilo that we saw in 2022. So what are the key drivers for profit? And I'm nearly done now, guys. And sorry, it does take a while to get through financials, but key thing is, look, whatever you farm, you've got to get the appropriate stocking rate. And it's realizing that we're all slightly different as well. So what is your ability to grow grass? And what is the overall feed in the system? So the first starting place for this is what tons of dry mass are you growing on the milking platform? The next side of this is to maximize your pasture consumption. So we need to manage the concentrates going in. Are we putting in too much? The ideal is to only fill a true deficit. And we need to, like this, the last few years, it's been like the 500 kilos of milk solids per cow has become the holy grail. But actually, it's about balancing the grass management with cow productivity at all times. And it's not the easiest thing to do, but the emphasis needs to change. We need to put it a little bit back on pasture growing again and pasture consumption. We also need to keep productivity in the cows. So we still need to, even if we're taking on the breed changes, we need to optimize days in milk. And to do that, we need to maintain our 6-week calving rate, and we need to maintain our 365-day calving interval for efficient productivity. So being very aware of where that is. You also need to know your industry limits. So I still believe that, we need to utilize nitrogen to maximize grass growth when conditions are favorable. It's still, grass will always be our cheapest feed. All of the costs of the system are higher than the rest of Europe. So we need to hang on to that competitive advantage. We need to grow grass because it's what keeps us going. The ideal this year is to focus on cost control. And just remember that simple systems reduce your confusion and costs. Like, it's your ability to make the right decision in the right situation. And I always used to quote the KISS, keep it simple, stupid. But it feels like our system's gone far from simple these days. But, trying to keep it there. And just remember, as I said before, your economic policy still matters to you. Like, it very much impacts the cash that you have in your hand. So just to finalize, this is a simple example. 100 cows, 480 kilos of milk solids. If we look at the €5.30 for the 2023 price, that gives you a milk income of 254,000. If we put stock sales onto that 15%, because that's often where milk is at 85%, that gives us 295,000 to play with. If your expenses are 70% of that, that's 204. You retain 30%, that's 90,000. So that's roughly as good as you'd hope to be for the medium farmer right now. That's where they are. And that's what you've got to play with for drawings, loan repayments, interest, tax, capex, what have you. If you get your cost structure a little bit tighter and you get your expenses to 60%, so 177 instead, you end up retaining you end up retaining 40%. So that increases to 118,000. So that's an extra 27,000 into your pocket. Now, obviously there's tax to be paid off that as well, but you can see the difference it makes, and it gives you a heck of a lot more choice. So look, it comes back to being able to control what you can control, and you certainly can't control milk price, so you have to control your costs. So look, I'd just like to thank you for listening. I hope you got something from it, and I'd like to thank our chair tonight, Linnea, and also Deirdre for hosting this, and sorry if I ran slightly over. Thank you very much.
You haven't run over at all, Mary. We've got 10 minutes available for questions. So I'd welcome questions coming in to Mary. Mary, thank you. That was just phenomenal. We'll take questions by two methods. You can send them in via chat. So go to the bottom of your screen, you'll see chat, or we'd welcome them via putting your hand up and we'll call you. You take yourself off mute and we'd call you just to ask your question. So Mary, you had so many messages in there I'd encourage people to go back and watch it because Mary and I've done a lot of preparation and I've had the privilege of seeing this data, and you've issued some really strong challenges, Mary. One thing that really struck me strongly, I probably, and I know I'm New Zealand and wasn't living in Ireland, but I work strongly with Irish people. Last year was a dismal year. In our mindset, it was really dismal. But when you demonstrate that, Mary, when you show the figures, actually, I'd always thought, oh, it's a lousy payout. It wasn't. It was a good payout. And our costs were higher. But what's really interesting, when you come off a high, and an extraordinary high, it's around our mindset. Because actually, it was probably one of the better years, but around our mindset and also the quickness to realize cost control, and thank you for that. Really hit me through your presentation tonight. Just amazing. I'll ask the first question and then I'll come to any questions from anybody coming in there. The first question I'd just like to ask Mary is, if someone wants to get better at cost control, so if our people listening think, right, I'm going to really focus on getting a handle on costs, your starting point with that, please, Mary. Where do we start? What do we have to do better in this area?
Well, the first point is to know where you're at. So the first point, cost control, for even myself, is to take the 2023 accounts and put them into a budget. And from that budget, realise how are the cow numbers the same? And if they are, then you start thinking to the physical application. So like if you want to reduce your concentrate usage, the first thing you have to ask yourself, well, how many tons did I feed last year? And if I want to target that as a cost control item, then I need to think about its reduction and when can I try to reduce those tons out of the situation. So a lot of people would go away from that and having said, well, last year I fed 110 tons. This year I want to feed 90 tons. Write that 90 tons on the top of a whiteboard. And every time that a load of concentrate came in, write that load down, take it off the 90 tons, and always be very aware of how many more tons you've got available to play with. And it makes you a little bit more strategic about when you might actually implement that feed. But again, yeah, so you take last year's figures. So if you've never done financial assessment before, the first point is for this year to be a foundation year. Figure out what your costs are, but from then you need to realize where is your use and what is it on. And then if you want to change that use, you have to scrutinize when you're putting those drugs in. So for myself personally, we used to always spend a load on the vet and med, and I actually scrutinize that to within an inch of its life, and I've never had it so cheap as this year, because I started to realize how many bottles of 100 ml of antibiotics came into the farm, how many tubes we're using to treat mastitis. And then we changed the protocols. And once we changed the protocols, actually a cell count didn't get worse, but actually very much what we spent on it did. And also starting to realize we used to, again at home, have the vet in, and I used to determine what we were getting the vet in for during the year, and a lot of the time it was for what he referred to as pleurisy or pneumonia, and then because of that we then put a pneumonia vaccine in, and we actually got bang for a buck. That's just an example, but it's, you start at your higher cost, you realize where you're falling down, and then you start to target to how is it getting applied, and it's realizing how you can break down the application, then reduce your use, because for a lot of costs it's about reducing your use, and that is a challenge. And then for others it's about buying smart, say in terms of fertilizer or what have you. There is, you know, it's not easy, it's one of the hardest things you'll ever do, but
and so Mary, one of the things you pointed out strongly, our largest costs are on feed and fertilizer. So, you know, and that you gave a really strong message about, you know, our feed use. So that's one of the big items that people can look at. I have a question from Mella here. Mella has asked, oh, this is going to be interesting, Mary. Do you have a figure of what percentage of crossbred herds versus Friesian Holsteins are using sexed semen? Now, you're going to need some database to answer that one.
No, Mella, I don't. I haven't started asking that one, but maybe I should. No, I don't. I would say this year it could have been upwards of 75% used to sex this year, but I don't know. There was quite having done the costs, realised what it was costing. I didn't put sex in this year for that. But yeah, I find it hard to spend more on an item that gives more variable results, and that's the honest truth of it. But you know, you identify the things you want to cut down.
Yeah, but
and I have oh, sorry, Mella.
Yeah, I just will say, you know, I think the biggest drawback from the outside looking in with the crossbred herd is the male calves, and I can't understand why the crossbred herds aren't using sex straws.
They are, to be fair, and that's, well, with my lads, they definitely are. The challenges with it, I suppose, Mella, what I'd say about sex semen, right, it needs to be put into the right circumstance. The one I don't understand now, if there's collars in play, if the herd has collars, for me, the place to put sex semen is on the cows with the collars at the right time. The one that gives them the least consistency, from what I can understand on farm, is when farmers use fixed time AI on the heifers. Some do very well and some do very poorly, but it comes at a very high cost. And the one thing I always know about the heifers is they're actually unproven stock. There might be a better EBI, but they haven't got the reliability of a cow. And the other thing that worries me about this year is the maths, because of that lower variability of sex, there's probably, my hunch would be, there might be a little bit too much of it gone in as well. So it's about doing the maths right. You need to figure out firstly how many replacements you need. Mella, like, I wouldn't get that frustrated. I can honestly tell you that for the crossbreds herds, they are using sex. And actually for the calf issue, you know, I've said it before, it's as much a calf problem as and I don't know if it's fully the sex going to create the solution to it, but people are already moving away to the Holstein anyway. Like, a lot of the crossbred herds are putting in pure Friesian AI. So, you know, again, start with the maths. Yeah.
Thank you, Mary. I have a question in from Catherine. Can I move on to a question? Sorry, did I cut over you there, Mary?
Move.
Lovely, thank you. I move on to a question from Catherine. And Catherine's just said greater than 80% of the milking platform is greater than 80% of the total farm. Should we not really have our heifers on? So this is a question, they must have heifers on, weighing up grazing off for heifers.
No. Yeah, like if your milking platform's more than 80%, especially if it's 85%, it's the ideal scenario to be contract rearing. Or you could even consider being a flying herd. Now that's another not nice prospect people don't like to think about, but if you can strike a deal. But yeah, no, in that scenario, you probably would be financially better off, and it would be a simpler system to run if it was just pure cows and you had another farmer rearing your stock. Now your other
Lovely.
option is to actually go out and rent more ground, but again, what's the cost of that? But contract rearing's actually got quite expensive in the last wee while. So again, if you're going to go down the route of contract rearing, ask around, see what other people are paying. Yeah, strike a reasonably good deal.
Lovely, lovely. Thank you. Any final questions to come in? I'll just call for any final questions.
There's some questions
Muriel?
on the chat, Linnea.
Yes, I do. You see any further one there? I think I've covered the several I have. If you might have more directly to you, please, Deirdre.
So some farmers are cautious about cutting meal at breeding time. Could Mary comment?
Yeah, no problem. Key thing to realise about meal is it actually drives milk solids. So the ideal time for feeding meal is to support them during very early spring when you're tight on grass. So that's the better time to put it in. In terms of actually supporting breeding, there is no statistical evidence, there never has been, to actually doing that. The main thing is that you manage the condition score of the cow, and that is the one sort of parameter that nobody really measures very well. But it's realizing that pre-breeding that your cows are, one, in good order, have enough flesh coverage. So if you were tight on grazing at that time and you were tight on condition score, then you could maybe justify keeping the meal in. But actually, all meal does, and every time you look at it, it promotes milk solids. So for some farms, they do need to make sure that they, especially if they're high stock, that there's enough meal going in to promote those milk solids, to get the right milk curve the rest of the year. But it generally doesn't add anything to your breeding performance. Actually, breeding the right cow, making sure they've got the fertility score, but managing that condition score, that is where you gain, essentially.
Thanks, Mary.
They
And
can.
there's another one here from Anya. How many farmers in your group are achieving the target 500 kilos of concentrate per cow? Seems to be a glass ceiling we can't break.
Yeah, no, there is actually quite a lot, to be fair. Yeah, I could name at least probably 25% of them. Yeah, I could achieve. Now, yeah, it is a hard ceiling to break, and it needs to be relative to where you are as well. Like, I actually, find it a very hard ceiling to break. Actually did it in 2015, 16, but because we have a wet farm, it's just balancing it out right, and it's not always necessarily the best thing to be do. So realize your limitations. If support needs to be put in, you put in the support. But if you're on a dry farm and you've got adequate pasture, you need to, like, as I say, your decision to keep the meal in for breeding purposes, it's not generally the right choice. The best bang you ever get for meal is first in the autumn, because it pushes your grass forward and it also holds on to condition score. The next best bang for meal is in early spring, when you are tight for grazing, because it gives good support. The worst time to put meal in at all points is in the summer, even when you're tight on grass. But I know, like in the droughts of 18, I understand it. And it's about just getting that balance right. But yeah, that's the order of where you get response to meal. But yeah, if you have a wet farm or challenging farm, I'm not, it's about getting the right target on the right farm, essentially.
Lovely. Mary, 9 o'clock has approached us. Thank you very much for sharing your knowledge that you've gained practically and through your doctorate and your education and working in your consultancy. Thank you for sharing it with Dairy Women Island members this evening.
One less comment, Linnea, and it's
Yes.
just, again, to get in the mood, and that's what we're, is that last year I had a fella come up to me. He says, I have never made as much money and I have never been so depressed. The mood of farmers at the moment is on the floor. There's people getting out of dairying that I never thought would get out of dairying, and there's fellas considering it, and they are sick and tired of this repeated battering and a lot of instances. And I think it again comes back to being, focusing on what you can control, and sometimes realizing it might not be as bad as you think. It's just, there's just a few things that have got out of kilter.
No, Mary, I think you've really placed that in front of us tonight. Last year felt harder because we'd come off such a high situation, and it's like riding a roller coaster, and that is dairy farming. But you've demonstrated, and your graph of spread shows that there are many farmers already producing. We don't need to be Mary's top 10%, but if we can get into that upper third, a fabulous place to be. We've got a wonderful dairy industry that shares knowledge. So for people on the call, do get out. I know you're heading into calving now, but do get out, find what other people are doing, get to your Chaggas Open days, be part of a discussion group, reach out to the Dairy Women Island Network, because a lot of the science and the systems are already known. So Mary, thank you. And thank you also for the challenges about retaining the fundamentals of advantages of the Irish farming system, being pasture-based, growing pasture eaten by high genetic merit stock. We can't lose fact of that. Remember the economics amongst the environmental concerns there, and watch the drift. That New Zealand has certainly drifted away from those fundamentals strongly, and Ireland doesn't need to make those errors as well. If I can just close with a couple of wee messages. Coming up next, look out for our spring series of farm events in April. They'll be focusing on this very important topic of grass management. So we'll advertise those nearer the time, obviously, March, when you put your head back up, and we'll start to advertise the spring series. And we're also absolutely delighted to informally announce save the date for our conference this year. So our conference this year is Saturday, the 23rd of November, and a venue will be advised in due course. But you might like to just note that for those that went to last year's exciting conference, we plan to obviously repeat that again this year, so with the venue to be confirmed. Along with Mary, I'd like to, on behalf of DWI, wish everyone a fabulous spring. Hope it goes very well for you all. And look after yourself, look after your team, get that sleep. We don't need to be working at 150%, 80%, 85% is just grand. So best wishes for a great spring ahead. Thank you all for coming. Thanks, Mary.
Thank you.
Thanks, Deirdre. You might like to stop our recording. Thank you.